The Galactic Council chamber echoed with laughter, sharp, condescending, and utterly dismissive. Captain Elias Voss clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening as the ruling speaker, a serpentine Ralvok, uncoiled itself from its throne-like seat. The human race, the speaker hissed, amusement thick in its voice, has outlived its usefulness in warfare. Your species is predictable, limited, and now officially irrelevant. A murmuring agreement spread through the assembly of alien dignitaries. Tall, silver-skinned Bexari, beetle-like Gonthrans, and the crystalline Zalari nodded in arrogant consensus. The Galactic Council had spoken, and to them, that was the end of it. Voss inhaled slowly, his military uniform creaking as he tensed. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to scream that humanity had bled for the same galactic peace these smug bureaucrats now enjoyed. Instead, he pressed his communicator, sending a silent message to his fleet, waiting beyond the Council's homeworld. Across the void, in a darkened command center orbiting humanity's last colony, Commander Alex Grayson watched the signal light flicker. "They did it," Grayson muttered, his voice heavy with restrained fury. "The bastards really did it." Behind him, officers and strategists hovered over holographic maps, their faces etched with exhaustion. They had known this moment was coming. The Zorvith Dominion, an empire of ruthless conquerors, had been tearing through human space for months. And now, with humanity cast aside by the Council, there would be no reinforcements, no allies. "They're not going to let us leave quietly," said Lieutenant Marissa Devereaux, arms crossed over her armored chest. "The Zorvith smell blood in the water." "They always have," Grayson replied, straightening. "The question is, do they know we still have teeth?" On the surface of Proxima, for the last human colony still resisting Zorvith occupation, the city burned. Buildings that had stood for generations now lay in shattered ruins. The air was thick with acrid smoke, and distant sirens howled a dirge for the fallen. Sergeant Owen Carter crouched behind a crumbling barricade, wiping sweat and soot from his forehead. His squad of battered soldiers were down to their last rounds, their armor dented, their expressions grim. "Well," Carter said, reloading his rifle with the deliberate slowness of a man who had made peace with death, "on the bright side, I don't have to pay off my bar tab anymore." A chuckle rippled through the squad. Even now, at the edge of oblivion, humanity found a way to smirk in the face of doom. "Cut the chatter," barked Lieutenant Vega, though a ghost of a smile flickered across her face. "Zorvith patrol's coming. Keep your heads down." Above them, the sky split apart as another wave of enemy ships descended. Their angular forms gleamed under the colony's artificial sun, gun ports glowing with lethal intent. The final attack had begun. Back in orbit, aboard the human flagship Endurance, Voss stood on the command deck, watching the incoming fleet. It was a wall of destruction, a force designed to obliterate anything in its path. "We can't win a direct fight," said Grayson, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "Then we don't fight directly," Voss replied. His officers exchanged glances. He continued, stepping forward. "They see us as weak because we don't play by their rules. They think war is predictable, that battles are won by superior numbers and brute force." He turned to his crew, his gaze burning. "But we're human. We fight like cornered animals. We adapt. We endure. And most of all, we make damn sure that when someone thinks we're finished, we remind them why they should have killed us the first time." Silence stretched across the bridge. Then, one by one, his officers nodded. Orders began flying. Engineers rerouted power to experimental weapons. Pilots strapped in, adrenaline surging. The Endurance shuddered as its engines roared, turning the ship toward the enemy fleet. The first shots were fired. Explosions rippled through space as humanity's remaining warships burst into motion. They darted unpredictably, their formations erratic, their patterns seemingly chaotic. The Zorvith, programmed for methodical conquest, hesitated. Deep inside the enemy flagship, General Karzoth watched the battle unfold. His claws tapped against the armrest of his throne-like command chair. They are fighting like they have nothing to lose, murmured one of his advisors, uncertain. Karzoth bared his fangs in a cruel grin. Then let us take the last thing they have. The Zorvith forces pushed forward, their heavy cruisers unleashing a storm of plasma fire. Human ships buckled, but they did not break. On the surface of Proxima, Carter and his squad sprinted through the burning streets, weaving between wreckage and fallen comrades. Vega, tell me you've got something good, Carter panted into his radio. A burst of static, then, oh, you're going to love this. Across the battlefield, hidden artillery platforms powered up. They had been cobbled together from scrap, salvage from destroyed ships, and abandoned factories. Fire everything, Vega commanded. The sky roared as missiles streaked upward, finding their marks among the enemy landing crafts. Fireballs bloomed in the heavens, sending debris raining down. From the council chambers, where the aliens watched the battle through holographic feeds, murmurs of concern rippled through the gathered dignitaries. They're supposed to be losing, one Zalari said, crystalline limbs twitching. They are losing, another insisted, though his voice wavered. Back aboard the Endurance, Voss stared at the readouts. Losses were severe. Ships were vanishing from the display, lives ending in flashes of light. But the Zorvith were faltering, unable to predict the sheer desperation of human tactics. A transmission from the council flickered onto the screen. The Ralvox speaker regarded Voss with something almost resembling unease. Captain, it said, carefully, this fight is pointless. Surrender, and perhaps we can negotiate terms for your people's survival. Voss smiled, but there was no humor in it. You don't get it, do you? He said quietly. You already decided we were dead. That means we're free to do whatever it takes to prove you wrong. Then he cut the transmission. Below, Carter and his squad reached the central Zorvith command post, a towering construct of alien steel and pulsating energy. Vega, status? He called. Almost there, came the reply. Hold them off a little longer. Carter exhaled, then turned to his team. All right, you heard the lady. Let's remind these lizards why humans don't go down easy. The last stand had begun. The void was alight with fire and wreckage. Where once the Zorvith fleet had advanced with crushing certainty, now chaos reigned. Human warships, outnumbered and outgunned, moved unpredictably, darting through the debris field like predatory phantoms. The Dominion had expected a desperate, doomed defense, not this. Not an enemy that fought like cornered wolves. Aboard the Endurance, Captain Elias Voss stood at the center of the command deck, eyes locked on the unfolding battle. Readouts flickered on the screens before him, detailing losses, too many, too fast, but also victories. A Zorvith battleship had just been disabled. A cruiser, caught in a trap of its own making, spiraled into oblivion. Still, it wasn't enough. Humanity had inflicted damage, but survival required something greater. How long until they adapt? Voss asked. Commander Alex Grayson didn't look away from his station. Minutes, maybe. Their AI is rerouting commands. If we keep this up, they'll crack our patterns. Voss exhaled. The Dominion's strength wasn't just in numbers. It was in efficiency. Cold, calculated maneuvers designed to smother resistance. But efficiency had its flaws. Predictability. A need for order. Then we make sure they have no pattern to crack, he said. Grayson raised an eyebrow. You're not about to suggest what I think you are. Total battlefield disruption. For a moment, no one spoke. That's suicide, Lieutenant Marissa Devereaux muttered. Not if we embrace the one thing they fear most, Voss countered. Uncertainty. We don't fight them like a fleet. We fight them like a catastrophe. There was a pause, and then, slowly, understanding dawned. Randomized fleet formations, Grayson murmured. No consistent firing patterns. No predictable retreats. Voss nodded. And psychological warfare. The Zorvith aren't afraid of death. They're afraid of losing control. Orders spread through the fleet like wildfire. Within minutes, human ships abandoned conventional formations. Fighters wove between capital ships in erratic, high-speed maneuvers. Destroyers switched targets unpredictably. Some vessels went dark, vanishing from scanners only to reappear in unexpected locations, launching ambushes that turned the battlefield into a storm of disarray. The Zorvith hesitated. Their battle algorithms, designed to counter logic, struggled against an enemy that refused to make sense. A command ship faltered as its escort scattered under a reckless human attack. A cruiser held fire too long, unsure whether the vessel before it was bait or a genuine retreat. Inside the Dominion flagship, General Karzoth observed the shift with narrowed eyes. He was no machine, no mindless strategist relying on programming. He was Zorvith, bred for war, tempered by victories that had spanned centuries. And yet, what he saw disturbed him. "Report," he growled. His adjutant hesitated. "The humans are behaving erratically. Our tactical AI cannot establish." "Shut it down," Karzoth snapped. "This is no longer an algorithms war. This is mine." Aboard a battered corvette, Sergeant Owen Carter wiped blood from his forehead as the ship lurched violently. The battle in orbit had turned into something surreal, a tempest of impossible maneuvers and sudden, savage explosions. Below, on the surface of Proxima 4, the ground war raged on. The colony was dying, but it was taking its killers with it. Carter keyed his comm. "Vega, tell me you've got something good." "Define good," came Lieutenant Vega's voice, breathless from exertion. "If you mean completely insane, then yes, I have something fantastic." "Great," Carter muttered. "I'm in the mood for bad ideas." "Good, because we're about to hijack a Zorvith artillery unit." He blinked. "I'm sorry, you what?" Vega chuckled. "Turns out they don't expect their own weapons to be turned against them mid-battle." "Yeah, shocking oversight. I'll send a thank you note after this is over." Gunfire crackled in the background. Less sarcasm, more support, Carter. "We need a distraction if we're going to pull this off." Carter glanced at his squad, all battered, all exhausted, and all grinning like madmen. "You heard the lady. Let's cause some trouble." They moved fast, weaving through the ruined streets, drawing Zorvith fire away from Vega's team. Bullets and plasma blasts cut the air, but Carter barely noticed. He lived for this, the rush, the impossibility of it all. Above them, the battle in space shifted again. The Zorvith, for all their might, were struggling. Reports flowed through the Endurance's bridge. Enemy ships were withdrawing in small numbers, unable to keep up with the chaos. "The Council is watching," Grayson noted, eyes flicking to the long-range surveillance feeds. The Galactic Council, those arrogant bureaucrats who had dismissed humanity, now observed from a safe distance, their expressions unreadable. "Let them watch," Voss said. "They wanted us gone. Now they can witness what that actually looks like." But the fight wasn't over. The Zorvith were wounded, not defeated. And Karzoth, watching his forces falter, made his decision. "Prepare the final wave," he ordered. His officers hesitated. "Sir, if we commit everything." "Do it," Karzoth growled. "If we retreat now, the Council will see us as weak. This battle ends here, one way or another." In the next instant, the Dominion fleet surged forward with renewed ferocity. Aboard the Endurance, alarms blared. Mass acceleration detected. "They're committing everything," Grayson murmured. Voss clenched his jaw. The battle had reached its peak. Either humanity broke the Zorvith here, or the fight would be lost forever. On the surface, Vega's team finally breached the artillery compound. Engineers scrambled, working frantically to rewire the massive weapons to target the enemy fleet. "Almost there," she whispered. Carter, pinned down behind cover, risked a glance at the sky. The final clash had begun. He could see the faint, glowing trails of debris burning as ships died in orbit. His people were fighting, bleeding, dying, and still they stood. "Vega," he called, voice raw. "Whatever you're doing, do it now." She didn't answer. Instead, the sky above them ignited as the hijacked Zorvith artillery roared to life, targeting their own fleet. Fire and metal rained down in every direction. The impossible had become reality. And at that moment, something shifted. The Galactic Council, watching from their secure stations, murmured among themselves. This isn't possible," one whispered. "They were supposed to fall," another said. Yet there, amid the wreckage, humanity refused. Voss exhaled. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. Not yet. We've made them bleed, he said. Now let's see if they remember how to run. The silence that followed the cannon fire was unnatural. For a fraction of a second, the battlefield seemed frozen, the violence suspended in an eerie, weightless void. Then the sky burned. The Zorvith fleet, once an indomitable force of calculated destruction, fractured under its own weapons. The artillery Vega's team had turned against them fired relentlessly, tearing through their formation with ruthless efficiency. A Dominion dreadnought, its hull breaching from multiple detonations, listed to one side before splitting apart, its death throes illuminating the void. Smaller warships, caught in the storm, scrambled to reposition, but the chaos had already taken hold. Their fleet cohesion was shattered, their precision obliterated. Aboard the Endurance, Voss remained motionless, watching. The bridge was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of instruments tracking the carnage. "They're pulling back," Grayson murmured. It was subtle at first, hesitation in their movements, a shift in their formations, but then the truth became undeniable. The Zorvith, for the first time in recorded history, were retreating. "They don't retreat," Devereaux whispered, almost to herself. "They do now," Voss said, his voice grim. But victory had its price. The human fleet was barely holding together. Every ship bore scars, fractured hulls, failing systems, dwindling ammunition. Many vessels had been lost entirely. The battle had taken everything they had left. "Sir, incoming transmission," a comms officer announced. "It's from General Karzoth." Voss turned. "Put him through." The holoscreen flickered to life, revealing the Zorvith commander. His once imposing figure was hunched slightly, a gash across his brow, leaking dark fluid. Yet his eyes burned with something beyond anger, something dangerously close to respect. "You are an anomaly, Captain," Karzoth rumbled. "Your species was not meant to survive this war." Voss's expression remained unreadable. "Yet here we are." The Zorvith general exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. "We will not forget this. Humanity has forced its way back into the galactic equation. But know this, you have not won. You have merely delayed the inevitable." Voss leaned forward slightly. "The inevitable is what we make it." Karzoth held his gaze for a long moment before cutting the transmission. For a beat, the bridge remained silent. Then the weight of reality settled. The battle was over, but survival was still uncertain. Their ships were battered, their people exhausted, their future uncertain. "Sir," Grayson said carefully, "the Council is hailing us." The words sent a ripple of tension through the room. Every officer knew what this meant. "Let's hear what they have to say," Voss said. The Galactic Council's chamber appeared on screen. Dozens of alien representatives sat in their hovering thrones, their expressions ranging from unreadable to outright uneasy. The Ralvok speaker, who had once dismissed humanity with barely disguised contempt, now regarded Voss with something approaching wariness. "Captain Elias Voss," the speaker began, "humanity has demonstrated an unexpected resilience." Voss said nothing. He let the silence stretch. One of the crystalline Zalari shifted uncomfortably. "The Council does not condone the actions taken today, but we acknowledge the reality of what has transpired." Voss's eyes narrowed. He knew what was happening. The Council was repositioning, trying to realign themselves with a new balance of power without admitting they had miscalculated. "We are prepared to discuss humanity's continued role in the galactic community," the Ralvok speaker continued, carefully measured. "Under proper oversight, of course." A bitter chuckle rumbled through Grayson's throat. Voss remained composed, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. "You dismissed us when it was convenient," he said. "You left us to die because you believed we were expendable. And now, because we refuse to be erased, you want to discuss our continued role?" The council chambers stirred with quiet murmurs. "This war has destabilized many systems," a Vorik representative said cautiously. "It would be unwise to remain divided." Voss let the words hang. He glanced at his officers, the men and women who had bled for this moment, and then back at the screen. Humanity will decide its own future, he said, voice calm, absolute. We do not need your oversight. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Some clearly wanted to argue. Others remained silent. We will reconvene, the Ralvox speaker finally said, cutting the transmission. The screen went dark. A heavy silence followed before Devereaux let out a slow breath. That's as close to an apology as we're going to get. Voss turned toward the bridge viewport, staring at the debris field where human and Zorvith ships alike floated in silent testimony to the battle fought here. We're not done, he murmured. Not by a long shot. On the surface of Proxima 4, Carter stood amid the ruins, his rifle slack in his grip. Around him, his squad watched as the last remnants of the Zorvith ground forces pulled back, their towering war machines trudging toward retreating dropships. The colony was a wasteland, charred buildings, craters where homes once stood, the scent of burned metal and blood thick in the air. Vega approached, helmet tucked under her arm. Her expression was unreadable. We held, she said simply. Carter exhaled slowly. Yeah, we did. He looked up at the sky, where streaks of light still flickered as ships moved, as humanity refused to be erased. What now? Someone asked behind him. Carter rolled his shoulders, wincing at the aches that would never quite fade. Now, we start over. Vega smirked faintly. And if the Zorvith come back? Carter's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then we remind them why they should have finished the job the first time. No one laughed, but the grim certainty in his words settled over them all. The war wasn't over. But today, humanity had made itself heard, and the galaxy would never forget.